Our basement was partially finished when we moved into the house several years ago, and quite honestly, well, there's nothing wrong with it, except that several times a year it gets wet. The carpet gets soaked, and I've been concerned that there could be some mold behind these wall panels. So, the time has come to do something about it.
Last year, Larry Janeski, the founder of Basement Systems, helped me solve a similar problem on the unfinished side of my basement. I've called Larry back because in addition to being an expert in keeping basements dry, he's also an authority on what it takes to build living spaces below ground.
Basement space is different than upstairs space. We have moisture from water vapor coming through the walls, water vapor coming through the floors. And even if we fix a groundwater problem 100%, a basement is like a pit underneath the house, and the house has a plumbing system. If there's ever a leak in any of the piping system in this house, second floor, first floor, that water is going to wind up on this basement floor. Mold grows on wet organic material. People see mold these days, and it's a big deal. So what we need to do is use no organic materials.
Okay, rule number 1, avoid organic materials. Next, our discussion turns to the ceiling.
I mean, it's typical of what probably was done again 20 years ago, but what's really bothered me about this ceiling is that these tiles seem to sag in the center. The whole thing looks like it's kind of fallen apart.
Larry's got a plan, and I like the sound of it. He also has an idea for upgrading our basement windows.
You won't have the mud and the weeds and the leaves, and it'll bounce a lot more light into the basement because it has a white colored bottom. So as the sunlight comes down, it bounces off the bottom and bounces into the basement off the ceiling.
And finally that floor that's always getting soggy.
I don't recommend carpet in a basement because it's a sponge. When it gets wet from a plumbing leak, mold can grow underneath it. Floor is a very important surface in the basement because it's the one you're in contact with most. So you feel the cold, and if you do have any kind of leak, of course, the water settles on the floor. It doesn't settle on the ceiling or the walls, it settles on the floor.
Now, if somebody else in my position who's thinking about finishing or refinishing their basement, what kind of bottom line advice would you give them?
You need to use all inorganic materials so that if your basement floods, nothing gets ruined and you never have to do it again. This basement was finished about, 20 years ago, and here we are doing it over because we're not happy with it.
Walls, windows, floor, and ceiling, well, they've all got to go if I want a finished room down here that will be every bit as comfortable and nice looking as the rest of the house. The bottom edge of this panel reveals the telltale signs of my often damp, occasionally flooded basement. Well, this is it. My basement stripped back to bare concrete. A blank canvas of sorts, full of possibilities. Rather than studs and drywall, the new walls will be assembled from these 3.5-inch thick prefabricated panels. The room side surface is a tough, scrubbable vinyl laminated to a ceramic concrete board, which is, in turn, bonded to high-density foam insulation. All of these materials are non-organic and completely waterproof. I was curious just how strong these panels might be, so I devised this impromptu strength test using my pickup. The results were pretty impressive. The panels are mounted in place using a metal track system. Because most basement walls are neither flat nor vertical, a chalk line and laser level are used to lay out what amounts to a perfectly square and plumb room within a room. Once the position lines have been established, the upper metal track is installed on a strip of fire blocking. Then, the bottom track is positioned directly below it and attached with concrete screws. Each panel is installed by setting it on the U-shaped bottom track, sliding it into position, tilting it up until it contacts the upper L-shaped track, then screwing it into place using drywall fasteners designed for metal studs. Next, a sheet metal brace, or biscuit, is driven into the edge of the panel and attached to the concrete wall. Then the edge of the next panel is forced onto the protruding flange, anchoring the panels to each other. This process is repeated at each joint, eliminating any flex and making the wall quite rigid. While the wall work continues, a second team moves outside to tackle those problem windows. First, the soil is removed, the corrugated window well liner is lifted out, and finally the hole is enlarged and reshaped. From inside, the old window is removed, but the outer frame is left in place. The new vinyl frame is slipped into position, leveled, shimmed, and insulated. Back outside, the new well liner is set into place and concrete fasteners driven in. Then the flange is caulked and the liner is backfilled. Inside, the windows are installed. A trim frame is set into position, leveled, shimmed, and attached with screws. Finally, the shims are trimmed flush. Because the overhead is a maze of pipes, electrical boxes, ductwork, and more, this will be a suspended ceiling. That is, it will hang from the joists. We begin by installing crown molding around the walls at ceiling height. Next, hangers are installed at 3 to 4 foot intervals by screwing them in using a drill. Now the main beams can be hung or suspended from the support wires. Shorter sections called cross tees are now snapped into place, forming a gridwork of 2 by 2 foot openings across the entire ceiling. Now 2 foot square acoustic tiles are set into the gridwork. Unlike typical cellulose tiles, these are made using a non-organic mineral fiber and have an antimicrobial coating to resist mold and mildew growth. They're also more rigid than conventional ceiling tiles, guaranteed not to sag. Some ceiling tiles will house recessed lighting fixtures. The openings are first drawn with a compass, then cut out using a standard drywall saw. Then the light canister is dropped through the opening and the housing is secured to the gridwork. Finally, the bulb's installed and the canister is pushed back up through the opening and snapped onto the housing. In addition to dimmable recessed mood lighting, the room will also have energy-efficient fluorescent task lighting. The fluorescent tubes themselves are U-shaped and concealed behind a diffuser panel. As soon as the lighting is finished, the electricians pull the wires for the receptacles and install the outlets. Now it's time for some trim and finish work. Baseboards, door casings, and a decorative column wrap, all of which look convincingly like wood, but are actually made of thermoplastic resins. Our room is truly taking shape. Now for the finishing touch, the floor. You may remember the old flooring was carpet laid directly on concrete, and more than once it got a real soaking down here. There's always the prospect of a basement flood from a plumbing leak or the possibility of water vapor migrating through the concrete floor. With this in mind, the flooring we'll be putting down looks and feels like wood, but is actually solid PVC, 100% waterproof. It has a honeycomb design that makes it very strong and at the same time creates an airspace that insulates the floor. This type of flooring is also available as tile or carpet, both waterproof. Now this is a floating floor system. That means it floats on this polyethylene pad, which cushions the floor and acts as a moisture barrier. The flooring itself requires no nails or glue. Each plank interlocks with the next and can be tapped into final position using a block to protect the edges. End pieces are cut to length using a power miter saw and carbide blade. Cutouts like this can be made with a jigsaw. The pad is laid down one strip at a time as the work progresses around the room. Quarter round or shoe molding is used to trim out the edges. Like the baseboard, this is not wood, but thermoplastic resin. As for that column wrap we put in earlier, well, this split collar base adds a nice finishing touch. That's it. My finished basement is finished. Larry Janeski drops by to take a look and make a final point.
I mean, I knew this was going to turn out nicely, but I didn't know it was going to turn out this nicely.
I knew. Yeah. Basements are different than other environments in that they're going to be damp, they're going to be wet at times. And you know, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, when we do a project like this, how long do we want it to last? And if the answer is we want it to last forever, or as long as the house stands without having to remodel it because it's ruined, well, then we need to use different materials like we've done here. And you can use different materials, not wood and not drywall, and still have it look fantastic.
This story began with a basement that looked like this. The transformation has been a bit, well, magical.
I'm thinking drywall and paint insulation. You're saying no.
Well, this is the total basement finishing system. This product is completely inorganic, and that's the key.
And this is the old, what you said to me, you can actually put this thing underwater and you have no problems with it. It looks awesome. Everything you said, and then some. We're done.